Venice is widely considered to be one of the most romantic destinations in the world. But unfortunately, without proper planning, it's very easy for your dream trip to turn into a nightmare. Hi, I'm Christina from happytowander.com, and Venice was actually the very first city I ever visited in Europe. I've since been back several times over the years, both for fun and for work, and in that process, I've learned a lot of must-knows the hard way. So in this video, I'm going to be sharing all my best Venice tips and must-knows for first-timers to help ensure that you have the best trip possible. Alright, let's get started with some basic must-knows and travel planning tips. First off, it's helpful to know that the Italian name for Venice is Venezia, so this is the name that you're going to be looking for when you're taking buses or trains. In addition to knowing that, I do think it's quite important to learn some basic Italian before you go. The truth is, Venice gets its fair share of really rude and terrible tourists, so if you make a bit of effort to learn the local language, it makes it a lot easier for you to communicate, and locals are more likely to be receptive to your presence. So on that note, I'd like to thank this week's sponsor, Babbel. Babbel is one of the world's top language learning apps, and it is really ideal for pre-travel practice just because it emphasizes conversational phrases and vocabulary that you're actually gonna use when you're traveling. So things like ordering drinks at a bar, un vino, or asking for directions. The lessons are short and snappy, so you can squeeze them in any time, and there's also a really fun variety of different exercises, all of which give you a very satisfying ding when you get it right, so it really appeals to me.
Andiamo in metro.
Andiamo in metro. They also have specific travel-themed lessons as well, so for instance, you can learn some slang for when you go to Venice. L'ombra. So if you want to give Babbel a try, you can check out the link in my description for 60% off of your subscription, whether you go for 1 month or even their lifetime subscription, which includes all their languages. So be sure to let me know in the comments which language you would most like to learn, and be sure to check out Babbel in the description below. Alright, next, in terms of how long to stay in Venice, a lot of visitors actually choose to come to Venice just for a day because accommodation can honestly be really expensive. But to be honest with you, if you want to get the full Venice experience, I would highly recommend at least staying 3 nights so you can be there, in the morning before the day trippers arrive and also in the evening after they leave. Trust me, it's a much more magical experience that way. Plus, as of 2024, Venetian authorities are going to be trialing a new day trip fee of €5 to kind of deter people from just coming in for the day during peak periods. So there's also going to be an additional cost as well. And in terms of when to visit, unfortunately, there's no such thing as quiet season when it comes to Venice, just because it is one of the most popular destinations in the world. So even if you go in the wintertime, there's probably going to be people. But if you're looking to get away from the busiest periods, I would avoid peak seasons like summer, Easter, and also Carnival season. Winter is when you'll generally find fewer crowds, but of course, it does have its own downsides, like gloomier weather and more potential for rain and floods. So to get the best of both worlds, I would recommend trying to time your visit for spring or fall. In terms of arriving in Venice, the main airport is the Venice Marco Polo Airport, which is only 5 miles away from the city. There's also the much smaller Treviso Airport, which is about 25 miles away and services only budget airlines like Ryanair and Wizz Air. For that reason, you can often find pretty cheap flights going into that airport from other European countries. So if you're planning a bigger trip that includes other countries in Europe, then it might be worth looking into flights into that airport as well. To get to Venice from Marco Polo Airport, the quickest option is to book a private water taxi. This of course does not come cheap and starts at €120. This can be worth it if you're in a bigger group or if you just want that once-in-a-lifetime experience because it only takes 30 minutes and is of course the most glamorous option as well. Another much cheaper option is to take the Ali Laguna water bus, also known as the Vaporetto. This has 3 potential routes that go to central Venice for only €15. Do bear in mind though that this is much slower and can take over an hour. You can also opt to take either a taxi or a bus, which is a little bit cheaper, but bear in mind the closest you can actually get to the historic center is Piazzale Roma. And from there, you actually do have to continue your journey either on foot or by taking a water bus anyway, so just keep that in mind. Apart from flying, one of the best ways to get to Venice is simply by train. Venice is very well connected to the rest of the country through the Italian rail network, which has over 2,000 stations. If you do take that path though, take note that there are 2 different stations that have Venezia in their name. Firstly, there's Venezia Santa Lucia, which is the central station that is actually located in historic Venice. And there's also Venezia Mestre, which is located on the mainland and is actually where a lot of locals live and where you'll find a lot of administrative buildings. To be honest, unless you're staying in Mestre, odds are you're not going to want to get off the train there, so just double check before you get off the train that you are actually at the right stop. Now, the last option for arriving in Venice is by car. Unfortunately, as you should know by now, there are no cars allowed in the historic center of the city, so if you do drive, you're going to have to end up leaving your car in a pricey parking lot throughout the duration of your stay. So just keep that in mind. In most cases, that's probably not going to be the best option unless you're maybe planning a larger road trip across the country. All right, now let's chat about where to stay. When choosing accommodation in Venice proper, the two main options are the historic center of Venice and Mestre, which is, as I mentioned before, the mainland part where there's a lot of admin buildings and also some cheaper options for hotels as well. If budget allows, staying in the historic center is always preferred, because that way you can easily explore Venice before and after the day trip crowds, and also just feel like you're properly in the city. This central area is divided into 6 districts known as sestieri, all with their own pros and cons. To help you get your bearings, one of my favorite things about Venice is if you look at a map of it, it's actually shaped like a fish. So you can think of the Santa Lucia train station as the eye of the fish. If money is no object, staying in the belly of the fish is going to put you in close proximity to most major sites, with San Polo and San Marco being the priciest and busiest neighborhoods. Dorsoduro here is also a great choice, with some more affordable options and some quieter pockets as well. If your goal is avoiding crowds though, the tail of the fish, Castello, is probably a better option. This is the largest of the sestieri and also the quietest, relatively speaking. And in terms of transport links, the most convenient areas are Cannaregio, the head of the fish, which is home to the Santa Lucia train station, and Santa Croce, the fish nostrils, I guess. This is the area that's home to the transport hub Piazzale Roma that I keep talking about. But of course, the vibes in these transport hubs isn't necessarily the classic historic vibe that a lot of people think of when they want to stay in Venice. Overall, there are pros and cons for each of these areas, so I would recommend just sitting down and determining what your individual priority is, and be sure to check out my step-by-step guide on how to find the best hotel every time if you need a little bit of extra guidance. My last tip in terms of travel planning is to simply pack light. Many modes of transport like water taxis and boats in Venice actually have restrictions on how much luggage you can bring. Plus, no matter what, at some point during your trip, you're going to end up having to carry your bags, whether that's to bring them up over a bridge or to bring them to your hotel. So just keep that in mind. Now it's time to talk about tips for Venice transport and getting around. When it comes to the central core of Venice, as I mentioned before, this is a car-free city, so your two options for getting around is either on foot or on the water. In terms of water transportation, the cheapest option is to go by Vaporetto, which are like public water buses. One-way tickets can be quite steep though, at €9.50 each, which is why I would highly recommend buying a travel card, which is valid for set periods like 24 hours, 48 hours, 72 hours, or a week, and that way you're gonna save a lot of money. You can also book a motoscafo or private water taxi, but of course that is going to cost you way more, with trips within the historic center commonly costing minimum €70 regardless of where you're going. Of course, there's the world famous gondolas as well, but those actually aren't really meant for transportation, they're more meant for sightseeing, so we're going to discuss those later. The other main way to get around is by foot, which can be great because you see more and you feel like you're really experiencing Venice. On the other hand, it can also be quite terrible because it's very easy to get lost in Venice, and during peak season, the crowds can make it pretty unbearable. One important thing to note is that GPS services like Google Maps don't actually work very well in Venice, so I would try my best not to rely on it. Instead, I would plan my route with important landmarks and street names in mind, just so I'm able to find my way even if my data isn't working. Having a backup offline map downloaded or a physical paper map can also be really helpful so you have a point of reference. Most hotels will give you one once you check in. I find with Venice, it does help to just assume you're going to get lost, because that way you're going to build in more time buffers between booked activities, and also it's going to be less stressful if you're anticipating to get lost, because honestly, at some point you will. And if you're going during peak season, I would highly recommend adding an additional buffer of 10 to 15 minutes, just because the foot traffic can really slow you down that much. I'm going to finish this section with a brief overview of Venetian street signs, which are known as niziolati. And these are only really helpful if you can understand them, so that's why I'm going to briefly explain, because they're not as straightforward as most street signs. The most common word you'll see is calle, which is basically just the generic word for street. Some variations of this that you might see include calle larga, which means wide street, and caleta, which means narrow street. In any case, this word generally applies to streets that have buildings on both sides. This is in contrast to a fondamenta, which is a canal-side street that has a building on one side and a canal on the other. Ramo is a small side street that often leads to a dead end. Sotoportego are unique passageways that go underneath buildings. And you'll also see other terms for street that don't necessarily have anything to do with the physical properties of the street themselves, but rather to do with their historical context. So Salițara, for instance, is a word used for some of the city's most historically important streets, which were the ones that were paved first. While Reotera refers to streets that used to be canals before they were filled to make streets. And Ruga are streets that used to be filled with compacted soil so your shoes don't get dirty. Now, in terms of typical Venetian squares, the word they actually use is campo, which is different to the piazza that most other Italian cities tend to use. In Venice, actually, there's only one piazza, and that's Piazza San Marco, or St. Mark's Square. Of course, very important is the word ponte, which means bridge. And it's important to note that the word used for most of Venice's waterways is actually rio, and not canal, which is only reserved for some of the biggest and nicest and most famous canals. Now, to get your bearings once you're in Venice, you can look out for signs that have a red font or red border, often with an arrow pointing in a certain direction. These ones will tend to point you in the direction of famous landmarks. So if you ever see a sign that says per, it actually means for, so go this way for Piazza San Marco. These days, they also have navigational signs that are bright yellow, so it's quite tough to miss them. All right, I know that was a lot, but I hope it helps. And if you find yourself lost in Venice, just think of my annoying voice and hopefully I'll guide you through it. Now let's move on to some tips for Venice attractions. First, be sure to book your big must-do attractions well in advance. The truth is, no matter when you go to Venice, it's going to be busy, so it's always a good idea to just pre-book your tickets for things that you really want to go to make sure you're not wasting time on the day of lining up, and also to make sure that you get the best possible deal. For timed attractions, I would advise either booking at the start of the day, so the first tour of the day, or maybe the last tour, because the middle of the day is always going to be very, very busy. Another tip I have is to book a sunrise tour. Honestly, with how busy Venice is, one of the only times that you're gonna feel like you have the entire city to yourself is if you go for a walk in the early morning. So I did a sunrise tour a few years ago in Venice, and it was honestly like the most magical experience, and I still think about it. It's one of the best things I've ever done in that city, so I would highly recommend doing something like that. On the other hand, you can also look for after-hours tours that give you admission to a lot of the more popular attractions in Venice after they close to the general public. Now, if you're hoping to save money on attractions during your time in Venice, which of course you are, then there are a few different sightseeing passes that you can look into. Confusingly though, Venice has several of these, and which one actually fits your trip best will depend on which attractions you want to see and also how long you're going to be in town. For most first-time visitors, the Venice City Pass is probably going to make the most sense because it includes a lot of major attractions like St. Mark's Basilica, Doge's Palace, and also a gondola ride, among other attractions. There is, however, also the Venice Discovery Pass, which includes public transport on Vaporetto boats, including to and from the airport. Adding on to the confusion, there's also the Venezia Unica Pass, the Venice Turbo Pass, and a museum pass as well, and all of these offer different combinations of pretty much the same perks. Overall, if you're planning on doing a lot of sightseeing, I would bet at least one of these passes is going to save you a significant sum of money. So to figure out which one is best for you, I would write down your key non-negotiable attractions that you want to do, as well as the time period that you're going to be in town. And from there, you kind of compare and see which one fits best. To be honest though, as great as the main attractions are, one of the best ways to really get to know Venice is by visiting some of the lesser known attractions. For such a small city, there are a number of really cool gems in Venice that many visitors miss, so I'm just gonna rattle off a few. First off, there's the bookshop known as the Libreria Acqua Alta, which has a really cool section in the back with displays made of ruined books. This is hands down one of the most beautiful bookshops in the world, so I would highly recommend checking it out, although it's not really so much a hidden gem these days. There's also the free rooftop terrace at the Fondaco dei Tedeschi, which is really beautiful and absolutely free so long as you book a slot in advance. There's also tons of really cool museums catering to different interests, so really make sure you do a lot of research in advance to kind of figure out some of the hidden gems in Venice as well, because if you only go see the major sites, you're missing out on a lot of what makes the city so special. Now it's time to talk about gondolas. This signature Venice experience does not come cheap, so I'm going to run through a few ground rules for you to understand and make sure you do it properly. First off, you should know that the prices of gondolas in Venice are actually fixed, so you're not going to be able to bargain or get a better price depending on who you talk to. These boats can fit up to 5 adults at once, and as of 2023 cost a fixed rate of €80 for a 30-minute ride during the day and €100 at night. Do note that while the prices are the same, not all gondolas take the exact same routes, so before you commit to one, make sure you ask the gondolier where they're going to be going. Ideally, you're looking for a mix of both small canals and also the big iconic ones, so you can kind of get the best of both worlds. At this point, you can also vet the vibe of your gondolier, just because that's really going to make or break your experience. After all the prices are the same, so you might as well find a gondolier that you like. Now, if you're visiting in the summer, I would highly recommend booking your gondola ride for the morning. There's a few reasons for this. A, that's the least busy time, and B, this is when gondoliers are likely going to be at their most chipper because it's the start of the day and they haven't yet been bogged down by all the tourists and all the work. Lastly, I would say consider boarding your gondola in a quieter part of town rather than in that central core where all the tourists are, just because the last thing you want is to get stuck in gondola traffic, and that's really going to ruin the magic of the experience. Now, if riding a gondola feels overly pricey, there actually is an alternative hack if you want to get out on the water. So instead of riding a gondola, what you can do is you can hop on a boat called a traghetto instead. This is a super budget-friendly hack because a traghetto takes you across the Grand Canal, and granted it is a very short ride, but it only costs €2. The boats are a little bit different than the standard gondolas. They're not as opulent and they're also quite large, so they fit more people. But if you're hoping to get out on the water at some point and you don't want to spend like €80 to do it, then this is a nice alternative. All right, next up, let's talk about food and drink tips for Venice. First, do avoid dining in St. Mark's Square. I know that these restaurants can look really enticing. After all, this is one of the most beautiful settings in the world, but trust me when I say none of these restaurants have good reviews. These spots are well known for overcharging for mediocre food, and really you're paying a significant surcharge just for the view. So if you're looking to soak up the atmosphere, I would recommend just sticking to a drink or a coffee or something rather than committing to a full meal. On a similar note, I would recommend trying to dine as far away as possible from the main touristy hotspots. And that's just because most of the time these restaurants are really catering to tourists and they know that you're not going to come back anyway, so they don't really need to bother with trying to have really good quality food or prices. On that note, make sure you only sit down at restaurants that do have prices listed. Over the years, there have been so many different headlines about Venetian restaurants that scam tourists with crazy high prices just because they didn't bother really checking the menu. A very common trick that they use is to charge food, like seafood for instance, by weight, and that way you have no idea how much the final bill is actually going to be until you get it. Now, another very important tip is to try traditional Venetian cuisine rather than just Italian classics like pizza and pasta. Wood-fire pizza ovens are actually banned for the most part in Venice, which means good pizza is actually in very short supply. And pasta actually isn't a very key component of Venetian cuisine. So instead, I would recommend you try some other local dishes, like for instance cicchetti. These are little bite-sized dishes that you can eat with your hands or a toothpick, usually for €1 to €3 each. They come in a huge variety, so they're great for tasting many local flavors at once, and you can usually find them at a baccaro, which are traditional Venetian taverns that are very cozy and very cute. A popular dish commonly seen at baccaro is sardine sour, which are fried sardines served with vinegar and onion. Venetians are also really big on risotto, with a superior iteration known as risi e bisi, which is rice and peas that is very popular, as well as polenta, which is paired with a variety of dishes like small lagoon shrimp and liver. And if you feel like you really need pasta on this trip, one thing to try is biguli, which is a traditional Venetian pasta that's commonly served in salsa, which means with a fish and onion sauce. Also, especially when you're traveling in the summer, don't forget to bring a refillable water bottle, because all around Venice you'll find these drinkable water fountains that are completely free and way better than buying bottles from the supermarket. And lastly, keep in mind that there are many more general Italy food tips that I didn't have time for in this video, so be sure to watch my full Italy travel tips video for things like how to order coffee and other faux pas to avoid. Alright, finally, here are some tips for once you arrive in Venice. First, keep in mind that the Italian and English names of places are often used interchangeably, so it's important to kind of have an idea of what names actually refer to the same place. So for instance, Piazza San Marco is the same as St. Mark's Square. The Palazzo Ducale is Doge's Palace, and Ponte di Rialto is of course Rialto Bridge. Another important must-know is to get ready to pay for public toilets. Unfortunately, public toilets in Venice can cost as much as €50, which to me is incredibly steep, so be sure to do your business or take care of business whenever you have ready access to a toilet, whether that's at the hotel, at the restaurant, or at a museum. Of course, be sure to always carry some coins with you as well in case you do need to take advantage of one of these paid public toilets. You should also definitely beware of pickpockets. Unfortunately, Venice is a very popular city, and with a city that has that many tourists and that many easy targets, there always are pickpockets in busier areas. So make sure you always have an eye and a hand on all your precious belongings and try to keep a distance from strangers. Also take care to not feed the pigeons. It's a very common sight in St. Mark's Square to see tourists holding their hands out feeding pigeons. This is super gross. You do not want to know where those pigeons have been, so make sure you are not one of those people. The photo op is not worth it. And speaking of gross, another thing that you should never do under any circumstance is go for a swim in the canals or dip your toe in the canals. Honestly, you have no idea how dirty this water is. It is literally filled with sewage, so make sure that you do not do it, not just because it's gross, but also because it's a finable offense, and if you're caught doing it, you can get charged hundreds of euros. I should also note that when you're shopping for souvenirs, do try to make an effort to find local artisan shops rather than going to those tacky souvenir shops that all sell the same mass-produced stuff. Most of the shops that are close to the main touristy areas tend to have the same mass-produced goods, so be sure to keep an eye out and try your best to find real artisans to buy from rather than buy cheap copies. Lastly, if you have time, I would really recommend doing a day trip to other islands within the Venetian lagoon. Some of those islands are absolutely stunning, like Burano, for instance, is known as the Rainbow Island, and it is so vivid and cute and beautiful, and it's honestly one of my favorite places I've ever been. There's also Murano, which is known for their amazing glasswork. Alright, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video all about Venice travel tips. And of course, if you want more practical travel videos like this one, be sure to like and subscribe for more. I'll see you guys next week.